Okay, great. Thanks, Anna.
No worries.
Well, welcome everybody. Great to see so many faces. Appreciate you taking the time and making the effort to join this masterclass with a focus on building a high-performance culture. My name's Justin Peckett. I'm the current chairman at Leading Teams. I'm also a part owner and a facilitator at Leading Teams. Been involved with Leading Teams over a long period of time. So I was first exposed to the Leading Teams model and methodology the summer of '94 in a past life as a player at within the AFL at St Kilda Football Club, and Ray McLean, the founder of Leading Teams, and again a part owner of the business, first came to St Kilda and introduced me to the model. So from there, I bought into the model quite heavily as a person from a professional point of view, but also on a personal point of view. It's a model that I've lived and breathed for a long period of time. I've seen the worst of it. I've seen the best of it. I've seen it work and fail dismally, both as a participant, but also as a facilitator. Retired from football at the end of 2006 and joined Leading Teams full time in 2007. So for the last 13 years, been a full-time member of the Leading Teams family. So the idea of today is, or this morning, is to expose you to the Leading Teams models, the methodology, some of the broad principles around the Leading Teams model. And we'll obviously use COVID as a bit of a backdrop, but not limited ourselves to COVID. Our model, our methodology, our I guess the broader principles, the tools that we use can certainly be applied outside a once in a 100-year pandemic. So just keep that in mind. But certainly we'll use COVID as a bit of a backdrop. Thanks to those of you that put some questions forward when you registered. We won't necessarily address every single question specifically, but there's certainly some themes that popped out, maybe half a dozen strong themes that popped out based on the questions. So I'll certainly be doing my best to cover off the themes. Post today, if there are further questions or if you need more clarity or more information, there'll be an opportunity to engage and touch base, and I'm happy to have those conversations with you. So certainly do my best to explain in some detail, but given the time frame, we won't be able to go into lengthy detail with every particular tool or model. Anna's here. She's going to moderate. So if you do have some questions as we go, just use the chat button and send Anna some questions as we go. So the way I do like to operate, we've got about an hour and a half. I'm capable of talking at you for an hour and a half. There's no doubt about that. But certainly if there's some questions that pop up as we go, feel free to ask. And again, we'll do our best to answer those particular questions. Okay, so Anna, we'll start with our model, if you like. If you can put the high-performing teams model up, yep. And we'll start there, and I'll start explaining. Now, I appreciate that some of you will have had Leading Teams experience before. I'm also aware there's quite a number of you that haven't, so that's okay. The model is a simplistic model. It's light on theory. It's a model that we use across all teams, organisations, and industries. And so essentially, from our point of view, a team's a team. It's about people coming together and trying to get stuff done. It's an empowerment model, so it's designed to give people ownership. And so while we might use this model across different teams within the one organisation or different organisations across different industries, ultimately it's really over to you, particularly as the leaders, to decide how much of this model that you do want to take and implement into your business, and what high performance actually looks like for you. So this model here is really our definition of what we think high performance looks like. I'll work from the top and work my way through. High performing leaders. So our view would be that a high performing team has high performing leaders. And so a high performing leader is someone who's clearly competent in the role, the skills, the knowledge to do the job from a mechanics and technical point of view, a functional point of view. It's also a leader in our view that values empowerment, that values people, and values the dynamics, which I'll talk about in a second. So high-performing leaders, it's interesting because I've worked in some organisations where I've looked at some of the I guess the titles of you guys, the guests this morning, and some are leaders, some are managers, supervisors, etc., etc. And it's interesting when you're working with clients to challenge them a little bit around seeing themselves first and foremost as leaders. I had an organisation that I was working with, a large organisation. Everyone on the org chart was a manager. They talked to themselves as managers. They were referred to as managers, and their biggest gap was leadership. And so I did say to the executive at the time, and not trying to be too flippant, but what if we just stopped calling them managers? And so throughout this masterclass, it is about team, but it's also about the impact that leaders have on team, particularly when navigating through, again, a pandemic, or particular challenges and issues that you have in the workplace. So seeing yourself as a leader first and foremost, and understanding the different roles that you would then play as leaders, which would cover off at times you will need to manage. You will need to coach, counsel, support, educate, direct, etc., etc. And so certainly with the work that we're doing, and certainly the work that I've been doing with my clients over a period of time, over the last couple of months throughout COVID, is getting plenty of evidence that leaders are certainly not shying away from the mechanics of what they do, but they are finding themselves more engaged and find themselves in more situations where they're having conversations with people as human beings, and are finding themselves perhaps having conversations that normally they may not have, or perhaps would shy away from. And they're the conversations, the genuine conversations, which I'll talk about in a second. We'll come back to the leadership element as we move through the morning. We split teams, organisations into what we call mechanics and dynamics. So mechanics are the technical aspect of what you do. It's the process, it's the policies, it's the strategic plan, it's the roles, it's the responsibilities. It's, again, when we go into an organisation, we're not there necessarily to tell them how to do their jobs, but certainly you guys are the experts in your mechanics, and it's an important part of the overall performance of a team. We have a focus, and the work that we do is around helping teams to look at their dynamics and spending some meaningful time having conversations around the dynamics, which would include obviously people, it's in relationships, it's communication, it's behaviour, it's personality, it's leadership, it's culture, and how that might play out in terms of helping performance, or perhaps getting in the way of performance. So mechanics and dynamics work together. They support each other. And so while we might be inside a team or an organisation helping them with their dynamics, there's certainly some mechanical challenges or issues that do pop up. We break dynamics down a little bit further. We have a particular focus around relationships. So we're not in the business necessarily of helping people become best friends. There's certainly a focus on developing what we call strong professional relationships. Certainly worked in some teams where perhaps they get on really well, they socialise on a Friday night, they know a lot about each other on a personal level, however they don't necessarily have a strong enough professional relationship, which perhaps then gets in the way of their ability to have a genuine conversation, a work conversation, some professional dialogue around work performance. And again, I'll expand on these a little bit later. The agreed behavioural framework is another element of dynamics. So we help teams develop a purpose, why they exist, agreed behavioural framework around a trademark and set of behaviours, and that is part of the empowerment model, where the team actually gets to agree on, what their purpose is, what they stand for from a trademark point of view, and also the behaviours that would underpin that particular framework. Again, all designed to give teams a reference point, along with their strong relationships, to be able to have genuine conversations and then drive the delivery of the strategy, the targets, the mechanics of the business or the team. If I go to purpose, what I'm planning to do is go through purpose, go through some of the dynamic stuff, the relationship, the agreed behavioural framework, and the genuine comment, and start to, we'll jump in and out of the model. I'll start to explore it in a bit more greater, further detail, expose you to some tools and some practical things that perhaps you can apply back in the workplace, and hopefully that'll generate some extra questions as well. So that fundamentally is our model. Again, it's a simplistic model. It's our definition of what a high-performing team can look like, but ultimately teams do apply it a little bit differently depending on their situation and their circumstances. So if I go to common purpose, so it sits at close to the top of the model. It's a really important part of team performance and how you would go about developing a high-performance culture. So the purpose is a high-level statement that articulates and clarifies basically why we exist as a team. It's a really important question. It's about creating alignment. It's about getting clarity so that everything that then sits below the purpose is important, that then links to why we exist. So the mechanics, the dynamics, etc., should link to why we exist. So to give you an example of a purpose, excuse me, rookie mistake. To give you an example of a purpose, at Leading Teams, our purpose is to assist teams, individuals to improve their performance. So essentially, we're there to help. And so when COVID kicked in, we certainly went to our purpose as a focus, as we always would, pre-COVID or post-COVID. And we talked about, well, we exist to help others improve their performance. We exist to help teams, individuals. So what does that look like for us now under this special set of circumstances, which is COVID, the challenges that presents? How can we still stay true to our purpose? And so a purpose can be a statement that sits on the wall and doesn't mean too much. A purpose where it has real impact is where people have had ownership over the purpose, have a say in what that looks like, and have more commitment and discipline around their purpose. So working in organisations, you might have an organisational purpose, you could have a team purpose. I'm certainly working in lots of organisations where the organisation has multiple teams. They all have slightly different purposes based on their functions, which makes sense. When COVID kicked in, we have a equities owners group. We have a leadership team, and what we decided to do was to bring those two groups together. As soon as COVID hit, we came together, and the first thing we did was to identify, clarify, and articulate what our common purpose as a group will be. So we called the group LEO. So again, we're a reasonably simplistic organisation. That's leaders and equity owners. We called the group LEO, and we identified that our purpose for the length of the time that we'll exist as a group will be to minimise the impact of COVID on our business, on our staff, their families, and on our clients. So straight away, that has some implications. And so when we did get together, our conversations were linked to why we exist. We developed some strategies, some plans, and then we went out to the business and communicated those particular plans. From an individual point of view, I also have a purpose. I guess the benefit of having a purpose, and my purpose is around leading a meaningful life and offering others all I have to give. And what I've found as a leader in particular over the last few months is at times I've felt a bit overwhelmed. I felt a bit vulnerable, a bit unsure. I guess even at times I felt a bit stuck and a bit paralysed around what I do next. And I've certainly been able to lean on my individual purpose as a trigger to generate action, behaviour, to drive decisions that I'm making and drag me out of that current situation. And that's no different to a team purpose. It's a reference point for decision making. I've worked with some teams where I've asked the question, why do we exist? And I've had some blank looks. And so I've asked the next question, well, if we didn't exist, how would our organisation be worse off? And in all the years I've done this, only with one team that I've worked with where I asked those two questions and I got 0 answers as a response. So they didn't know why they existed, they couldn't articulate why, and they couldn't articulate perhaps what would happen as a result if they didn't exist. And so effectively that could have been their last day and no one would have noticed. And that's rare, that's only ever happened once in let's say 20 years. One of the other common things that happen when you ask the question, you'll get multiple answers and you'll get different answers. And sometimes they're linked. We're saying the same thing, but just in a different way. Sometimes though, you get quite different answers that conflict and are quite the opposite. And so the impact there is that you might have some people in your team that make decisions based on their view of why we exist, and that may be conflicting with others. And so you might have a group of people that say A, group say B, group say C. They're off doing their own thing in terms of why they believe we exist, which has impacts in terms of clearly collaboration. It can create silos, creates confusion, and potentially when there's a pandemic or there's challenges or issues, it's a bit of self-preservation that can certainly start to kick in. And you can hear it in the language of people as well when you walk through organisations or teams that, the way that they see themselves in terms of their role, it does sound very disconnected to what the team or the organisation might be about. And so a leader's role is really around helping clarify, influencing and role modelling, particularly the behaviour and the language around the purpose. So it's really important, a purpose. If you don't have one, perhaps spend some time thinking about, well, why do we exist as a team? And understand that that may be having some impact around how the team and then ultimately the individuals within the team are coping within the COVID challenge and how they may be performing. Man's Search for Meaning is a book that I've read numerous times. Some of you may be aware of it. It's a story of Viktor Frankl being a prisoner of Nazi war camps, concentration camps through World War II. It's a wonderful book. I'd highly recommend it if you haven't read it so far. But he, and this will sound quite simplistic, but he developed what he calls a psychotherapeutic method, which was developing a purpose in life that he could feel connected to, that he could feel positive about. And clearly a Nazi war camp is an extreme example, but ultimately a pandemic, a once in 100-year pandemic, is also reasonably extreme as well. So he used his purpose, and his purpose was purely just to survive. So that was his purpose. And that, again, that might sound simplistic, but he talks about the fact that it was quite obvious those who had chosen not to, and that was in their behaviour and in their language. And so he used this purpose, and the book talks a bit about, a man can, who has a why to live, a purpose, can certainly bear with almost any how. So using that purpose. So for me, at leading teams, our purpose as a business is certainly helping us cope with what's going on around us. Our Leo group, having a clear purpose, has helped us cope and helped our clients cope. It's helped our staff cope and our families cope. And certainly for me as an individual, having an individual purpose is certainly helping me cope, although, at times you'll have bad days. It's a great book. It certainly talks a lot about choices, and certainly the choices that you make under pressure when challenged can be helped with a purpose, because ultimately, if you believe in your purpose, if you're committed to it, and there's some discipline around it, then you'll make more choices in line with why you exist. Anna, if we can just jump to the control, influence, concern model just for a second. I'm going to put you under a bit of pressure here because they may not be in order of in terms of what we agreed. Oh, there it is. So you'll find this in Stephen Covey's book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And really, this is, I guess, a summary of when you have a purpose in particular. When Leo got together, we certainly talked about all the things that concerned us through these challenges and how we're going to lead and the decisions that we're going to make and all the information that we were gathering, particularly from the announcements from the government on a weekly basis. We talked about all of that. We then quickly identified the things that we had some influence over and the things that we could actually control. That sharpened our focus because ultimately without that, again, a clear guiding purpose, we're at risk of, again, going in different directions and focusing on things and spending too much time and effort on things that perhaps we can't influence or have any control over. So again, control, influence, concern, a really important model to sharpen your thinking. And then again, it's not just about COVID, it's at any point in time. It's understanding at any point in time what you do worry about, what worries you, and what you can influence and what you can control. And if we just jump back to the high performing teams model for a second. So if I look at the strong professional relationships, this is a real key component of our model, and it's really something that drives performance of the behaviour of people, but also the performance of the team from a behavioural point of view and a mechanics technical point of view. So we dedicate time and space to work on relationships. It takes commitment. It needs to be a priority, and we often talk to clients about, because you hear, we're time poor, we don't have a lot of time, time is of the essence. And then ultimately we all get the same amount of minutes in a day. And so, how we choose those, to spend those minutes in the day is really, again, dependent on purpose and ultimately what we prioritise and what we think is important. So as a business, we certainly spend a lot of time focusing on relationships. So Anna, if you can just jump to the urgency model for a second. So with this model, and there's a couple of different elements to it, clearly it talks about urgency. So when things aren't as urgent for the team or for the business, potentially there's more time and space to focus on the dynamics and the culture. And inside the dynamics and the culture is the relationships. A key component of dynamics is relationships. And so it allows time and space to be able to focus on relationships. It allows leaders to engage and really connect with people, get a greater understanding for people, what makes them tick, some of the challenges they have in the workplace, but also outside of work. It also enables people to feel valued. It allows people to feel connected to their leaders, which ultimately encourages them and almost compels them to follow the leader. So when things do become urgent and it's all hands on deck, what you'll find, if you've actually committed time and space to developing relationships and building trust and respect with people, they'll follow you and they'll jump. They will follow instruction. There's plenty of examples at the moment. I don't want to get political, but clearly we've got some senior leaders who get up and particularly for the Victorians, are presenting on TV, and clearly there's a number of reasons as to why people may not follow the instruction, but some of it is around a disconnection. It's lack of relationship. It's a lack of perhaps feeling connected to the messages in particular. So urgency plays a role. When things are clearly urgent, perhaps it's more of a focus on mechanics. And certainly Leo, when we got together at Leading Teams, our initial focus and conversation was absolutely on the mechanics. Now, we've put a lot of time and effort in developing the relationships and strengthening the culture and the dynamics within Leading Teams. So we haven't felt initially that would be the focus. We certainly looked at the mechanics. We looked at our business. We looked at the numbers. We looked at the projections. We gathered all that information, and we were able to then go back to the staff and the team to say, hey, look, we're in pretty good shape. We're okay for the next 6 to 12 months. Clearly things can change, but at that point in time, we're in good shape. From there, we then started to focus on dynamics and culture. So looking at where you might spend your time, again, with or without COVID, looking at where you might spend your time on a day-to-day basis, on a weekly basis. What does a normal week look like for you, and where are you spending your time as a leader? I'm working with some clients at the moment that perhaps when things weren't as urgent, didn't spend as much time on dynamics and culture, perhaps didn't value it as much. They are now scrambling a little bit, but are committing to it. They are working on their dynamics and culture to support them through the COVID challenges, particularly with remote working and people feeling perhaps they're in isolation. So it can still be done. It's not too late. There are some teams now that we've moved to platforms like the one that we're on in terms of Zoom, because the leaders haven't dedicated much time and space in dynamics and culture. They are really struggling with maintaining connections with people. People aren't feeling connected either to the purpose. They're not feeling connected to their leader. The relationships aren't that strong. People are starting to feel a little bit more isolated than perhaps they need to. So the challenge for leaders and teams is really around looking at where they spend their time. And so that line can change. It is a little bit dependent on style of leadership as well. And so you can see down the bottom there that, the more directive style versus the more consultative. And consultative takes time. It takes a bit of effort. And certainly consultative is an opportunity for people to have more of a buy-in to what's happening around them. If you can go back to the high-performing teams model, Anna, please. So I'll continue with the relationship bit. The relationships, again, it's the balance between having a professional relationship and a personal relationship. We're certainly not against having personal relationships. We are, I guess, focused on the professional one at a minimum. But however, we want people to have a deeper understanding for people, because you're more than just the person that turns up for work. And again, we all have challenges and issues. And one of the great things about Zoom, well, I think it's a great thing, is when you do meet your team via Zoom, for a lot of the people, you actually get led into their personal lives, their home lives. You see the dog on the bed, or you might see the kids running around. You get a bit more of an insight into who people are and what's going on for them. So we combine both, but certainly in a high-performing team, from a high-performing cultural point of view, the strong professional relationship is really important. So Anna, if you can just perhaps go to the pyramid, please. So this is a model that we use to get teams to acknowledge and understand where their relationships will be or are at with people that they work closely with. It's about the relationship. It's about the level of communication that you have with people. The 5 main levels aren't a definitive list, so it's just our levels that we've come up with that we think that captures the types of professional relationships and levels of conversation you can have in the workplace. So if I talk about the grunt level, it's quite literally a grunt, it's a nod, it's a hello. We see each other in the workplace. We don't necessarily stop and have much more of a conversation than that. I've got an example of someone that I've been grunting at for about 18 years. It's more of a personal one, a neighbour down the street. We see each other, we just walk past and we sort of say, hey, g'day, and that's about it. So there's plenty of workplaces where perhaps you get stuck only acknowledging each other and saying hello. The stuff level is where you might perhaps expand your conversation, where you're now talking a bit more about stuff, and that can be work stuff, that can be a new project, it could be a new announcement in the workplace, it could be the weather, it could be the sport, it could be COVID. Clearly that gets talked about a lot at the moment. So it's about stuff. So it's more often not when you get together, that's the type of content that is involved in your conversations. The next level down is where you're involved in conversations around other people. So others are people you have in common. It can be a work colleague, it could be a leader, a boss. Those conversations can be at times productive. So I need to have a conversation with a work colleague. I might go to another work colleague to bounce off ideas and get some feedback around what I might want to say to that particular person. They give me some advice, they give me some feedback. I then go and have that conversation with that particular person. So that's reasonably productive. What's not a productive others conversation is when you have staff or you perhaps engage in conversations that are around other people, but perhaps it's about whinging, complaining, it's maybe you're venting and taking up time, not necessarily addressing the challenge or issue that you might have, but you are certainly talking about the issue. And so grunt stuff, others are reasonably safe levels of relationship and conversations that you might have in the workplace. The concept of the relationship is that we can, if we are, again, going back to creating time and space for dynamics and culture and building relationships, we can actually start to give more of ourselves and have a conversation openly and transparently in the team where I can share who I am, what I stand for, my role, my responsibilities. I can talk through my work preferences. I can talk about my challenges, my issues. I can talk about things that concern me, and then ultimately get down to the bottom where we can start to engage in genuine, open dialogue around performance. It's feedback, and I'll certainly come back and talk about that a little bit further. We have safe and risk because the risk for some in some environments is that if I do that, I'll expose myself, I'll be vulnerable, the information can be used against me. And so the relationship and the strength of the relationship, not only one-on-one, but also across your team, enables it to become a safe thing to do. So teams go through a bit of an evolution. We can start being reasonably polite and we can say hello and we can talk about stuff. But as we evolve and progress as a group, particularly under pressure and when we're challenged, we're able to have these genuine conversations and really give of ourselves so that we can have the conversation that we know that we need to have in a professional, effective way. And certainly not suggesting that you would hover around the bottom all the time. People will get sick of you if all you're doing is going around and providing feedback and perhaps sharing how you feel. And the other side, the flip side is if you get stuck at grunt, you're missing plenty of opportunity to really engage and connect with people and bring people along as a leader. So it makes sense that you would move up and down. And so the idea is that we would share that with clients. We'd get them to plot where their relationships sit at the current point in time. There's no right or wrong. It's just an acknowledgement. Here's where my relationship is at. Are there any benefits if I was to invest a bit more time? So again, that mechanics versus dynamics, creating time and space to invest in relationships. You can also use that model for external, clients, people outside your team, key stakeholders, people, anyone who really impacts your ability to do your job, your level of relationship with them, and the types of conversations you have with them are really important. Anna, if you can just go to the model again, the high performing teams model, please. So relationships are really important, and what I'll do as we work through, I'll give you a couple of other tips or tools or insights around strong professional relationships, how you may build them. I just want to talk a little bit about agreed behavioural framework. So agreed behavioural framework, as I talked about, is really what you stand for as a group, and it's about having ownership over that. So we call it a trademark. It's the same as having values. The trademark is what you stand for. It's how you want to be known. It's a reference point. It's a call to arms. It's an anchor for your performance. So a trademark is a really important reference point, particularly if the team or the business has ownership over it. Lots of organisations have values. People aren't necessarily connected to them because they've really had no, perhaps, exposure to building them. Perhaps they don't necessarily see the leaders role model it. So the values only go so far. So having an agreed behavioural framework is really important in our model. So if we're really clear on why we exist, what is it that we stand for, and what are the behaviours we'd expect from each other to be able to live and breathe, be the team that we want to be to certainly deliver on our purpose. The genuine conversation is then linked to the behavioural framework. It's linked to the relationships, and then ultimately drives the mechanics. So I just want to stop for a second because I think there's a couple of questions that come through, and then I'll answer the questions, and then we'll get back to just exploring the model a bit more and exposing it to some further processes and models that we use and tools. So, Anna, I'm not sure, you might have put them up on chat. I might have missed them.
That's okay. One of the questions. Yeah, one of the questions was how often should you review your trademark or behaviours?
Yep. Sure. So again, that's I guess that's a personal thing. What works best for you? I was working with an organisation, a $1 billion organisation, very, very successful. They developed a purpose and an agreed behavioural framework as an executive team. And I was meeting with them, despite how strong they were from a mechanical point of view and revenue. I was meeting with them every fortnight for only an hour and a half, but I was meeting with them for every fortnight. And that worked for them. Some organisations, some teams will meet, review quarterly, monthly, weekly. It really is dependent on, I guess, how effective your meetings are, the purpose of your meetings or your reviews, and what works best. We would certainly encourage meeting and reviewing against your trademark on a semi-regular basis, whatever that looks like. The reviews are really important. And when you adopt a model like this that covers off both mechanics and dynamics, ultimately what it allows you to do is to review with a bit more depth and a bit more meaning. So the reviews become a bit more meaningful because they're not just a tick the box task, quick whip around. You're actually reviewing it. Well, how are we going against our purpose? How are we going against our agreed behavioural framework? Who's seen examples of it? We're looking for evidence of buy-in. So when you think about an elite sporting team, you know, if I talk about the AFL, we have a couple of AFL clients in the Brisbane Lions and Port Adelaide Football Club and the Sydney Swans. Now they review on a weekly basis, and so when they review, they do talk about their game plan and the result. They also do talk about their collective and individual performance against the agreed behavioural framework. And ultimately that relies on strength of relationship and safety within the group to be able to put your hand up, make a comment, suggest something, share your opinion, provide feedback, etc., etc. In teams that have poor cultures and don't have a high-performing culture, they still have team meetings and they review. Very shallow, probably just mechanics focused, without any consideration around the fact that we might have relationships that impact our performance. So it is about being mindful around the depth and the meaning of your reviews. Certainly from a high performance point of view and a cultural point of view, you know, we have a review process, if you like, you know, learn, commit, do, and review. And without using all four of those elements, you really, I guess you have the handbrake on, or you're selling yourself short in terms of high performance culture. And so, you know, you need to do your job. And then from a high performance point of view, you should review how you go in your job individually and collectively, or how we go. And then you learn from that, you develop a plan of action, you commit to that, and then you go and do it again. So that cycle is really, really important. And again, in line with our model being reasonably simplistic, we encourage people to run simple reviews. So a review might look like, of your trademark, you know, one word to describe how you feel about our team right now, or one word to describe your preparedness for the week, one word to describe our team. Stop, start, keep doing. They're all simple ways, but certainly can get you to that below the line self and genuine conversation point in a team environment. So reviews are really important. If I was going to add something to this particular model, right in between mechanics and dynamics, I'd put review, because it's really important that people see and understand a connection between the dynamics and how they then do their job. They're not two separate things. And we're certainly not telling you that dynamics is more important than mechanics. It's how you bring both together, how they marry up, they support each other. Historically though, and certainly in my experience, I go inside lots of teams and they avoid the dynamics. I had an executive team, a successful business, an executive team where the two senior leaders, the two part owners of the business, had a very, very poor relationship. And through more rigor around their reviews and more meaningful reviews and more honest and genuine reviews, the group were able to acknowledge and put forward and be transparent around the fact that we don't see the two of you as having a strong relationship. In fact, we don't think you trust each other. And it is impacting us as a collective group. It's impacting us as individuals. It's impacting our business. And so the group then, based on the environment they were creating, were able to manage the relationship and essentially force these two individuals to go away and fix their relationship. Not so it was 10 out of 10 or they became best friends, just so it improved and became more productive to then not only support them, but also the broader group. So the review element is certainly important. Again, long answer to the question, but how often you do it, you need to work out. Again, you play around with it. You take responsibility for what the reviews look like from a leadership perspective. And if they're not working, ask the group, why aren't they working? How can we make these more effective? How can we get more buy-in? And certainly finding with clients working remotely and using Zoom or Teams or whatever the platform might be, it's about being a little bit creative, but also asking for feedback and using the group to have ownership. How do we make this meeting a 10 out of 10? And then being able to manage that if people are showing behaviour that perhaps is less than that or less than expected. Again, comes back to the ability to have the genuine conversation. And are there any other questions that were put forward that would be worth exploring?
There is a good one about, which I think relates to kind of any given team. If it's a volunteer organisation, I don't want to get into specifics, but, and there's no, everyone's a volunteer. Do you think that this model could work?
Yeah, well, yeah, great question. Thank you. I certainly work in the community myself. I have a community role and work with volunteer groups. It absolutely can work because it's about people coming together still to try and get stuff done. And so as a volunteer organisation, why do we exist? What's our main purpose? What does that look like in reality for us? What do we want to stand for as a volunteer group? What are the behaviours we'd expect? As volunteers, we've got to work together. What sort of relationships do we want? And do we have the ability and the willingness to ask some of those, have some of those genuine conversations? So I have seen it work, again, in any type of business, any type of team, in any type of industry. It's really dependent on the leader. It's dependent on the appetite of people to really embrace something like this. You may not embrace it the same way a multi-billion-dollar private organisation might, but you can still adopt parts of this model that will help. And it's a way to numbers thing. It's getting people to believe in it and being able to influence them and bring them on board. And maybe if you just go to the cylinder model for me, please. So if we talk about dynamics being culture and a key component of that is really the behaviour that gets rewarded in your team, and if we acknowledge that right here, right now as a team, if we did an audit, we describe ourselves a certain way, what's the truth about us now, ideally how do we want to be described, what are some behaviours that happen or go on, we tolerate, we accept them amongst our team, but we know they're counterproductive. And if we have a picture of how we want to be seen as a group and what our trademark might be, what would be the 3 or 4 key behaviours, regardless of gender, experience, personality, motivation, tenure. If you're going to be part of this team, these are 3 or 4 key behaviours that we own, that we think are important to drive the team that we want to be to deliver on our purpose. So if we were to drag the dynamics and the cultural element, put this into the cylinder model, this is very much like the life cycle of any team. So culture sits at the bottom because culture is there regardless, okay, whether you work on it or not. So what sort of culture do we currently have that enables us to head into it, as an example, the COVID situation, that's going to help us and sustain us and bring us through the other side in even better shape? Or what's the culture we can start to look at and develop and acknowledge the good bits, perhaps address the bits that are holding us back, so that we can actually, minimise the impact that COVID has on our team or on our individuals within the team or our business. So the trademark, the behaviours, your values, sits down the bottom there, and it has an impact on everything that happens. So then you look at leadership, and so leaders play clearly a key role in performance. And so as leaders, we want leaders who role model the culture. We want leaders who will influence. We want leaders who will drive, support, challenge, have genuine conversations. We have some clients that select their leadership team based on cultural performance, the people they trust most who will drive the culture. We select through an open vote at leading teams, our leadership team, and that's really based on who you trust most to drive the business from a mechanical point of view, but also the ones that you trust most who will role model the behaviour, the culture that we want. I have a client who rang me yesterday, and she's a leader of a team, and she has an opportunity to recruit someone into her team into a leadership position. And so this starts to talk a bit about recruitment as well. So she's got two internal applicants, one really strong from a mechanics point of view, poor from a behavioural point of view in terms of the direction the team's going in. Another internal applicant, less experienced from a mechanics point of view, but an absolute superstar when it comes to culture and living and breathing the values and encouraging others to do the same and influencing others to do the same. And as we talked, and I didn't really have to say much, she just spoke and talked about her situation, and she ended up answering her own question around who perhaps would be the better fit. So if we're clear on culture and we've got leaders who role model it, we're then better placed to identify those who we should be bringing into our team or our business. Recruit someone who can add value and fit into our culture and might need a bit of training and development versus someone who's really good from a skill component, but necessarily doesn't have any will or ability to buy into our culture. And so there's no right or wrong. It's about leaders choosing who they want to bring into their team. And so recruitment is a reflection of culture. So culture plays a role and leadership plays a role in recruitment. It's also about who you retain in your business as well. And under pressure, when challenged, heavy workload, you can start to see how people may fit or may not fit in a business. It gives you a bit more of a clearer picture. I've certainly experienced recruiting some people at leading teams where, we've scratched our heads and how did that person get in? So it's not foolproof, but certainly gives you a bit more of a clearer picture. So once people are in, it's about the induction, and there's a formal induction, there's an informal induction. So again, it's a great test for teams that might have recruited some individuals during this period of time under enormous stress and challenge for some. When we bring new people in, what are they observing? What are they seeing? What are they noticing? How do they feel they need to behave in order to fit into the culture? And do they see their leaders role modelling it? Who are the most influential in our business? What are they doing? Because they are having a huge role in how people are inducted informally. So the formal induction is a mechanic, is a process. The informal induction is more of a powerful way of really setting people up for how they then do their jobs. So culture plays a role, leadership, recruitment, and how you induct. New people are looking for clues as to how they fit in, and how do we respond, particularly under pressure when challenged, under extreme circumstances like a pandemic, as an example. You've then got to do your job. You've got to perform your role, and so how you perform will be impacted by the culture. So again, for me and my personal experience, because we have such a strong connection to our purpose and our trademark and behaviours, we have strong leadership that role model it and challenge and influence people and support people to do the same. I find that our performance as a business is still quite strong, despite the fact that there's a lot going on around us. And so individually there'll be ups and downs, and there'll be different people going through different performance peaks and troughs. So we get that, but we find we can address it because we have the relationship, we have the frameworks in place, we have the culture to support it. So you've got to do your job. Culture should help you not get in the way of doing your job, and then eventually you exit. And the idea is that you would exit in better shape, more knowledge, more experience, better off for having been exposed to the culture. So not worse off for being part of a team. And certainly I've been in some teams myself prior to leading teams where, had I exited at a certain point in time, I certainly would not have left any better off for being part of that particular organisation. So having a high performance culture impacts leadership, recruitment, induction, performance, and then eventually how you exit. So that's a life cycle. And if you can just go to the high expectation, high accountability model for a second. So when we talk about a high performance culture, and so high performing team, high performing organisation, they have strong mechanics. They also have a high performing culture to overlay or underpin or to support the performance of the team and ultimately the individuals within. These would be three common things that I've found across my journey, across all different teams in industries. They have a high level of expectation. So that covers off both mechanics and dynamics. That's the roles, the capabilities, responsibilities, It's also culture, behaviour, how we communicate. And the expectation is that we build strong professional relationships here. And that's a high level expectation. Some people just want to work in a workplace where I can just get my job done and I don't have to worry about everything else. And some leaders are open to that, and that's okay. But in our model, there's a high level expectation both of mechanic and the dynamic, if you like. So that's great. But it needs to be backed up with a high level of accountability. And so what I've seen in high performing cultures is that they not only have high expectations, they also have a high level of accountability. And what that looks like is that everyone expects to be held to account. And accountability can be a process, it can be a procedure, but in a high performance culture, more often than not, it's a conversation. It's a genuine conversation. It's feedback, peer to peer. It's a self-managed team through really high performing leadership where the team has ownership through an empowerment model, through an agreed behavioural framework where the team can have those conversations themselves. And they're not plucking things out of thin air. They're using the purpose, they're using the trademark and behaviours as a reference point for conversation. And so the genuine conversation is just that. It's the genuine conversation. It's your ability to be genuine when you talk, and for the other person to understand and believe that you are genuine, that your motive is pure, your intention is about improvement. And I'll talk a little bit more about genuine conversations before we finish. So the third element is that high expectations and high accountability don't really work unless in the first instance you've got leaders who are prepared to step up and demand that people meet expectation. So you need leaders to hold people to account. And so being willing and able to step up and have those conversations, role model, demand, influence, support, challenge people to meet the expectation. In the right way, at the right time. It's a strong word, but language is really important. And so what I've found is some teams that we have leaders, well, we have managers, we have leaders in leadership positions, but their inability or their unwillingness to really step up and lead and have conversations and leave it to others. Perhaps then, we have expectations, but we don't necessarily have the accountability to support it. So they're just three common elements that I've seen inside a high-performing organisation, high-performing culture. And was there any other questions that came through worth mentioning?
Yep.
They're all worth mentioning, but in terms of the comment that we've got.
There was one about kind of how to have a genuine conversation when you feel like potentially, if you're building a relationship and it's a personal relationship, how to then have a genuine conversation, like how to separate the two. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So separating the personal from the professional.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Can you just jump to the relationship assessment, please? So we have a tool that we use, and we get a lot of really encouraging, positive feedback around, people, a lot of evidence that people enjoy using this particular model. It's not for everybody, but certainly the feedback we get is certainly that this has been quite useful for people. So when again, the personal and professional, we are more than just the people that turn up for work. Everyone has things going on. So there's certainly value in having some understanding for what's happening for people and having some level of personal relationship and making connections. But your ability to separate that at times is critical. So a tool that we use to help people identify their relationships is that communication pyramid. So on a professional level, where do my relationships sit? Are they up high? Are they a bit superficial? Or are they deep and meaningful, and we can engage at a professional level around work and performance and expectation? We then can use this model this relationship assessment tool to help people actually have those conversations and really have their focus on the professional. We acknowledge that we might be personal friends or we may not be, so whatever the situation is, but this conversation is going to be a structured one that is absolutely focused on our professional relationship. And what I say to people that might be a bit worried about their personal relationship, if it is strong, it'll withstand this conversation. And if it doesn't, maybe your personal relationship wasn't as strong as what you thought it was anyway. Okay? So if I was going to do a relationship assessment with Anna, we would organise that we're going to do it. We would acknowledge that we're going to do it. We'd find a time to meet. And before we meet to have this conversation, we both would have filled out this sheet based on what we want each other to hear from each other. So I want Anna to hear from me the type of professional relationship I want from her is. And so I would make a comment on that at just a dot point. Again, not too complicated. I'd also talk about and share with Anna the one reservation I currently have about our professional relationship. Again, I'd make a dot point there and being prepared to come to that conversation with Anna and expand on it and talk about it. The three things that I'd ask Anna consider doing are, so there's some feedback for Anna. There might be some things that I think she's doing really well already, but I think she could step up and do more of. There may be some things there that I haven't seen from Anna. I think that these would be really good for her, but also good for me or good for us as a business. So those first three questions are around what I want from Anna. And so this gives me some structure. I can really think deeply around what I want Anna to hear, and I can put it down and document it. The bottom three questions are more about having empathy for Anna and putting myself in Anna's shoes. So what do I think Anna's going to ask from me? So what's the type of professional relationship I think Anna's going to want from me? Again, dot point, what do I think? The one reservation I think Anna will currently have about our relationship is, and the three things that I think Anna's going to ask me to consider doing are. So again, as best I can, I put myself in Anna's shoes. What do I think she wants from me? And what sort of feedback do I think she's going to give me? So I would fill that out. Anna would fill that out. We would then come together at a point in time and we'd find perhaps a neutral spot, a spot where we won't get distracted, a spot where we are free to have this genuine conversation with a bit of structure. And what this allows us to do is I might have some ideas in my head around what I want to say to Anna, but based on perhaps the relationship, perhaps Anna's got a position of power, perhaps based on Anna's personality, I might say something, Anna then responds, I get sort of thrown off track, lose my train of thought, perhaps we leave the conversation, I actually haven't covered off the things that I really wanted to cover off. And so this allows us to have a reference point to go, so we might still get sidetracked, but I can still come back, or Anna can still come back, and we can say, okay, let's get back into the focus of this conversation. So you'd find the right time, the right place to do it. You'd allocate yourself enough time, and it could be an hour, it could be an hour and a half. With the two gentlemen from the executive team that had the poor relationship, I gave this sheet to them and said, just go away, come back when you're ready. They came back in about 3 to 4 hours. So, you give yourself the time that you need to have this conversation. Have the conversation, clarify anything that needs to be clarified, acknowledge where we're on the same page, and not leave that conversation until you're really clear around what you've heard and what the other person's heard from you and what's happening next. And so again, it is focused on the professional. So it's a really good tool to separate the personal from the professional. Keep in mind though, there may be some personal things that are happening that are creeping into the workplace, and in a team that has a high performing culture, strong relationships, is invested in each other, are able to have genuine conversations, you might end up talking about some personal stuff. And again, that is okay, because what we're doing is we're still linking it to the professional performance. Okay, so don't shy away from it, don't avoid it, because ultimately to address the professional, we may have to play a bit of a role in some of the things that are happening outside of work. So I go back to, from a leadership perspective, see yourself as a leader first and foremost, and understand that the roles under that around, you'll need to manage, you'll need to coach, you'll need to support, you might need to educate, teach, train, develop. You might even need to be a friend, and you might need to counsel at times. Because if you've developed that relationship with someone in the workplace, they might knock on your door, and at that point in time, they may want to speak to you about anything. And it may not necessarily be work related. So it's your ability to understand A, people, and B, being willing and able to play that particular role in that point in time. So that's a tool. It's a great tool whether you have relationships that are poor. I did have a team of 4. 50% of that team hadn't spoken for over 3, 4, 5 months. So I gave them this relationship assessment. Now, they didn't walk out of that exercise arm in arm, skipping, and we're now best friends, but their relationship was a 0. On the back of this relationship assessment, you'd say it was probably a 3. And they'd made some commitments around how they'll relate to each other moving forward. So it's not a one-off conversation. It needs some continual work and a reference point. So you might have the chat, go back to your workplace, do your best to live and breathe some of the things that you've been asked to do. And at some point in time, you would come back and you review how you're going. Just like the team review is really important, individually the review is super important as well. I've also done this exercise with a staff member who her name's Shelley. She joined us probably maybe 1.5 to 2 years ago. On her first day in the workplace, she's based in Sydney. I flew from Melbourne to Sydney on her very first day, and we did a relationship assessment. And it was a great way just to set up some two-way expectation around what we want from each other. Me as her leader, and to hear from Shelley around what she wants from me as a leader was brilliant. And that got our relationship from a professional point of view off to a great start. So that's one of the tools that we use, really useful, really effective in helping people separate the personal and professional. Thank you for that question. Perhaps, Anna, if you just go back to the high-performing teams model for a second. So I have talked a little bit about genuine conversations. I guess, I know, we're quite deliberate around the language we use. And so genuine conversation is, again, a bit like and leadership, it's the higher level. And then think about all the different conversations you can have in the workplace as a result. You can have the hard conversation, the difficult conversation, the fierce, the confronting. There's books that are written all about having this conversation and the confronting, et cetera, et cetera. What I find is that people that have some anxiety around feedback in particular, and if we to tag it, the difficult conversation or the hard conversation or the confronting or the fierce, that might be enough to stop someone from actually engaging and being open to that conversation. So again, from a leadership perspective, being able to role model and the language that you use is really important. If we can promote genuine conversations, a question I'll ask leaders is do you believe that your people would see you as being genuine? And if they do, if the answer is yes, and you do believe that they see you as genuine, then that means you can have whatever conversation you need to have with them. You might get it wrong. You might say the wrong thing. It may not come out the way that you intended, but because of your relationship, because of the trust and the respect, because of the genuine nature of the relationship and the genuine nature of the conversation, people will be open to it. They may not like what they're hearing. They may not agree with what they're hearing, but they'll be more open to the message. And if you do happen to say the wrong thing, you'll work your way through it. If people don't believe that you are genuine as a leader, and even if you are trying to reward and recognise people, they will be suspicious. They will be looking for the hidden meaning, or they'll be waiting for that yeah, but. And so the challenge for any leader is, again, when we talk about the investment that's needed from a high performance culture point of view, when we talk about mechanics and dynamics and where you spend your time, if you've invested in the relationship, if you've built that relationship to a point where it's strong, you can then engage in genuine conversations, whatever they need to look like. So we talk a lot about feedback, and feedback's feedback, and feedback should be only delivered to help improve. And so again, if we've built the relationships, we've got agreed behavioural framework, we operate as a high-performing team, we engage in genuine conversations. If we see something, if we know something, we'll step up, we'll have that conversation. We'll provide feedback, a view, we'll engage at the level that we need to engage in. Anna, was there any other questions around the genuine, sorry, not the genuine, but any questions at the start that we didn't cover off?
Yep. So a question coming through about, how to keep a team motivated if, you're investing time and culture in your specific team, but the wider organisation isn't.
Yep.
What tips do you have about that?
Yeah, look, again, that's a really common one. I work with teams inside organisations, and they say, well, look, we're going really well, but as a sales team, we're going really well, but marketing, they're a rabble. So how do we work with marketing? And often when you go to marketing, they say, well, we're working really well, but sales are a rabble. So it's a difficult one. It's not certainly it's possible. It's about influence. It's about being influential. It's about influence. So, who's the most influential member of your team? And it might be you as the leader. It might not be. Who are the most influential members of the other areas of the business? And then rate your relationship with those people. If I'm trying to influence another team that we have to work closely with, I don't necessarily need to have influence over the team. What I need to have is a strong relationship with a member of that team, particularly the leader, or the leader and the most influential member of that team. So I'm often helping teams to plot, okay, who are all the key stakeholders internally and externally? Now let's look at your relationship with those teams, particularly the leader or the influential member of that team. So if I've acknowledged in my team that Anna's the most influential, and we've got to work with another team, and we've identified, I'm just looking on the screen here, Tracy is the most influential of that team. We're now building. So Anna, what's your relationship like with Tracy? Is it strong? If it is, great. We should be able to work better together. We should be able to influence and perhaps suggest and show what we're doing here and bring others along. But if the relationship between Anna and Tracy isn't strong, well, that's our starting point. How do we do? So we've got to invest time and effort into that particular relationship. So bringing others along, either internally within your own team or externally with other teams, is really about influence. And influence is about relationship. It's about understanding people, taking the time to have conversations, really listening to them, making connections. When you look at or if you looked at your calendar and you looked at a normal week, how much time am I spending, on the dynamics really? How much time am I spending investing in relationships? Or is it something that it only comes around when all of a sudden I've got an issue or I've got a challenge? Oh, well, I haven't invested in that relationship. So how do I do it now? So it's never too late necessarily, but it's about being strategic and planning around, okay, who impacts our ability to do our jobs? Okay, how do I then invest, and have I invested enough? So certainly a relationship-based challenge, and it's about influence. And so it's quite a good exercise to go through, either on your own or with your team. Who, as a team, let's sit down and who impacts our ability to do our jobs? Who are we connected to? Okay, how would we rate our relationship with them? What sort of conversations are we currently having with them? And how do we develop a strategy around addressing that? So that individual relationship assessment, there's a team version. So take out I and just put team in it. The type of relationship we want from you as a team is this, and that works quite well as well. Anything else, Anna, that would be from a question point of view that's popped up?
No, I think that answers most of them at the moment.
So if I talk a bit more about, Anna, I'll get you to go to the competence and character, the trust model. So I just want to share the trust model with you. Look, it's particularly from a leadership perspective. I talked about, our leaders at leading teams have been voted in based on trust. And so it's a combination of two things. One is their ability to do their job and competence, absolutely, so skill set. So having the skills to do your job, applying them under pressure is a key component of competence. People will trust you as a leader if you are good in your job. And so when I ask leaders questions around this particular model, they often can tick off the competence one. When I start asking questions around, well, what about character? What about behaviour? Would people believe you're good for your word? Would people feel that you'd put the team's needs in front of your own when required? Sometimes that just, oh, hang on a minute, I'm not too sure. Some can tick it off and are quite confident around that. Others, not too sure. And so for those of you in leadership positions, again, when we're trying to create a culture of high performance, and perhaps we're trying to navigate through, challenges and heavy workload and, pandemics and whatever else we might be facing as a leader, clearly having the competence to do that and also the character is really a key component. So it's an interesting model. It is about trust. It's our definition of trust, if you like. And so understanding where my gap might be. And then opening yourself up for feedback is, again, the genuine conversation. In our model, leaders are the role models, and so we'll often put leaders in front of staff and teams to be able to get feedback. And sometimes we use models like this to use as a reference point for some of that feedback. So an example I can give you is I've got a client. I've worked with them for a little while now, and so they keep taking more steps in terms of pushing themselves around what high performance looks like for them. And so the executive team of this organisation rated themselves individually against competence and character. And if you can go to the quadrant map, please. Next, yep, that one. So what they did was they mapped themselves individually against competence and character. And so it's a simple model again. I asked them to pick a benchmark. So what would be the bare minimum you can get away with as an executive in the team? So in terms of your level of competence and your level of character. And so they chose 8 as the number, as the benchmark. And so put a line through 8 on that quadrant. And they then plotted themselves. And then we came together as an executive and they shared where they put themselves in terms of how they saw their level of competence and character. They then opened them up themselves for some feedback amongst their peers. So it reinforced some of the thoughts, it challenged some of the thoughts. They developed some strategies of improvement, developed an action plan, and then go back to the business and do their best to follow through on that. They come back and they review. The next step was for the executive team, and this was something that they came up with, which was brilliant. They said to me, we want to sit in front of our next level down, our managers, and we want them to give us some feedback around how they see our level of competence and character without sharing their individual ratings. And so the next level down sat down, we facilitated a conversation where they plotted each member of the executive and gave them some really specific feedback as to why they plotted and where they did. And so that, when you talk about, genuine, when you talk about being transparent, vulnerability, taking a risk, role modeling the type of culture they want inside their business, it has to start at the leadership level. That may not necessarily mean at the executive level. It might be you as a leader in your team. If you want your team to buy into high performance culture, then as a leader, you certainly need to role model and step up. So they gathered a lot of information. A couple of them didn't like what they heard, and necessarily didn't necessarily agree with what they heard, but certainly valued the feedback. And now they have a choice around what they do with that feedback. And so once the feedback's been given, the responsibility of the leader is to show some sort of response. And in the response, that'll show the team or the organisation as to whether this is just something we espouse, high performance culture is just something we espouse, or this is something that's real and we've got leaders who live and breathe it and role model it. And what that should do then is open up the floodgates, if you like, to the rest to follow. So competence and character is really important part of not only individual leadership, but also from a leadership team perspective. And certainly we've used that model internally on a couple of occasions to provide feedback to people. Again, the feedback is about improvement. Even though you might not like what you hear or agree with it, in the spirit of high performance, in the spirit of a high performing culture, in amongst strong relationships, in amongst transparency, you need to hear what we've got to say. And we will help you and we will support you with the feedback you've been given. So within this model, within this environment of high performance, it's not a case of here's your feedback, good luck with it. It's certainly here's your feedback and here's the role that we'll play in supporting you and challenging you moving forward. So the extension of this, and I've touched on it a little bit, it's about getting leaders to develop their own personal trademark and an action plan that they can use as a reference point. So if we see value in a purpose and a trademark as a team, this is about then bringing it down to another level from an individual point of view. And so we certainly encourage our leaders to work with us around developing their own personal trademark and action plan. So again, in times of uncertainty, I use my trademark to lift me out of that uncertainty, to give me some guidance around what happens next. Okay, and I use my purpose, as I talked about earlier, to do the same. And as a collective group, either as Leo or as a leadership team or as a business, when we get together, we use that and review against it so that we can look at what we're doing well, gather the evidence, acknowledge that, but also look at where we can get better. And given the changing nature of COVID and the announcements that come out on a weekly basis, again, it forces ourselves just to straighten up, have a look at ourselves, create time and space for that, so that we can then check on not only the mechanics of our business, but also then look to, how are our people going as well. And then, we've got people just having babies. We've got people that have just joined our business. We've got some people in our business going really well. We've got some that are being challenged on a performance or revenue base at the moment. So we've got multiple strategies going and multiple conversations to help our team work our way through the COVID scenario. We truly believe that at the end of this, whenever that might happen, we'll be a better team as a result of COVID. And it's interesting working with clients that are doing things now because they're in a once in a 100-year pandemic. And so the challenge for them is, once the pandemic is over, do they go back to the old ways, or do they start to or continue to maintain what they've learned or had to relearn around not only their leadership but also their environment. It's fascinating talking to individual leaders around the realisation that they've actually got staff that are competent and they can trust and can do their job and don't need to be looking over their shoulder every minute of the day, which allows the leader to lift their head a little bit and look more broadly or long-term around strategy and what's going on across the business, as opposed to being involved in everything. So again, that's the urgency model then again. Trademark action plan as a team, trademark and action plan as a individual leader. Again, with some of these models, sort of whipping through them a little bit, I understand that. So certainly open to continuing the conversation post this particular session if you want more information or more detail or want some help with any of it. Anna, can we go to the committed team model, please? So this is a model that can talk about the team, or it can be about an individual. And I guess if you are as a leader, and if you are inside what you believe to be a high-performing organisation already, that's brilliant, fantastic. It is about looking about where you might be able to get some further improvement. If you feel you're somewhere in the middle, or perhaps you're right at the other end of the scale, or perhaps a little bit more dysfunctional, again, if you want to develop a high-performing culture, given everything that I've shared with you so far this morning, it is about mutual trust and respect. Again, through relationship, through conversation, through open dialogue, being able to ask questions, be able to get clarity, be able to really understand what's required. So again, those expectations, a clear understanding of our team purpose. What does that really mean for us? What does that really mean for me? And how do I align myself to that? You need to be able to have conversation. You need to be able to have open, transparent dialogue. Mutual trust and respect is a bit of a bedrock for that. Again, that creates safety. It creates the genuineness within the team. So if we've got that, we've got the open dialogue. We can ask questions. We can really gather that clear understanding, get that clarity. It enables people to then be more closer, if you like, to 100% committed individually or as a team. I'm totally committed as an individual, and I'm talking about me now. I am absolutely 100% committed to our purpose as an organisation. I believe in it. I've seen lots of evidence of it in action. I've got leaders around me that role model it. I'm challenged to do it. I'm 100% committed to it. And so it has an impact on my day-to-day activity. I know that if at any point in time I've got a question, or if I'm unsure, if I need to understand something, I can go to anyone in our team and have that open dialogue, whatever that looks like. And that is based on the mutual trust and respect that we have within the group, which can take time to build, but you can fast track it. It just needs leaders who are prepared to hold their line and really create time and space to have these conversations. And then it also requires a weight of numbers. It requires leaders to identify who's engaged, who's on board, who's an influential member, dragging them along and bring them along the journey so that you can start to increase the capacity within the group to buy in. So total commitment driven through clear understanding, open dialogue and mutual trust. People will be semi-committed or not committed at all based on the fact they're not really sure how their job actually links. I'm not sure how my job actually benefits. I'm not sure how this fits in. And if I don't have anyone to ask because I don't feel safe or I don't have the relationship, then perhaps I just fumble my way through. Fingers crossed I deliver what I think they want from me. And so the committed team model is really important. The next slide, Anna, that I want to share before, and I'm just mindful of time, that I want to share is just the team talk model, if you can. So when we talk about purpose, trademarking, behaviours, I did share it's about creating an anchor or a reference point, a real call to arms around who we are as a team, what we stand for as a team, and making sure that we have belief in that. So high-performing teams that have a high-performing culture, use their trademarking, their language. They believe it. They talk about themselves. We are a team that goes the extra yard, which is the leading team's trademark. I believe in it. I talk about it. We use it. There'll be times when we don't nail an opportunity to go the extra yard as a team or as a business or as an individual, but we see that as an aberration. Okay, that's not us. That's not the truth about us. The truth about us is we go the extra yard. Okay, and so a high level of team talk, we use it amongst ourselves. We also use it openly with our clients. And ultimately that impacts our performance, that impacts our behaviour. So we develop plans of action, we commit. What does that look like in terms of behaviour? We do our best to then follow through on it. And then our behaviour and our performance reinforces, that's because we go the extra yard. Okay, so that can feed off each other. They're all important, but one of the important parts of this particular model is then how others see us. And so others can be internal people within the business around, whether or not I go the extra yard as an individual team member within the team, but it's our clients, it's our families. And they give us feedback around, whether they see us or believe that we are a team that goes the extra yard, and that's based on what they see, our performance. And that feedback can, again, reinforce, you believe that we go the extra yard because we know we go the extra yard and we see ourselves going the extra yard, and that's what we stand for, and our behaviour follows suit. So that model feeds off itself in every direction. And ultimately your clients can be quite powerful and quite persuasive or quite influential around their view and their opinion. And so that can have quite an impact on how you might see yourself as a team. So if others don't see you as a very high-performing team, and if deep down you don't see yourself as a high-performing team, won't be surprised that you probably won't behave in a high-performing way. Don't behave in a high-performing way, that's because we're not very good as a team. And so your team talk anchored to your trademark is really important, particularly in times like this. Teams that have a strong sense of who they are, what they stand for, why they exist, use it to support primarily getting through challenges, heavy workloads, conflict, issues, and again, I've used it a couple of times, but pandemics. You can take the team out, you can put self in. We all talk to ourselves on a regular basis. Some of us talk to ourselves in a really strong, positive way, and that'll be because we have a strong sense of who we are and how we believe we are as a person or in our role, and that impacts on how we behave, and that's reinforced by others and the way that they see us, again, through feedback, through the way that they may interact with us. One thing to keep in mind with I guess, from a leadership perspective, is that you may be someone else's significant other. So, and if you can just quickly flick to the self-talk, you may be someone else's significant other, based on relationship, based on level of influence, based on your role. And so being mindful of how you behave and how you interact and how you talk to individuals, because that does have an impact on how they see themselves. So if you've got someone who's got poor self-talk or negative self-talk, and perhaps their performances reflect that, the way that you interact with them can certainly double down on it, reinforce it, or it can play a role in helping them to lift themselves out of that. And so the self-talk, again, having a personal reference point and trademark, or aligning your self-talk to the team one is an important part of the process. So, working on not only the mechanics and the action-based stuff that you need to do, but you need to be able to work on your belief. No point doing all the work if deep down you don't see yourself as a highly engaging facilitator or a highly resilient leader. I'm just plucking things out of thin air there. Because your belief will be the bit that gets in the way of performance, particularly under pressure. So having people around you that can provide you that feedback, being mindful that you may be someone else's significant other and have a significant impact on how they see themselves. We talk to ourselves every day, all the time, and so it's about having a bit more control over what that looks like. Feel yourself moving away from it, straightening yourself up with your reference point. No, I am. And then what does that look like? Here's my plan, follow through. So really key component, that belief element of who you are and ultimately the team element of it as well. Okay, I'm just mindful of time. There's a few minutes left. Are there any questions, Anna, finally, just to finish off with?
Not at this stage, but if anyone has any more, can you send them through now and then Justin can answer them?
But if not, look, again, thanks for your time. I've whipped through some of it. I appreciate and understand that. But certainly this hopefully gives you some insight into some of the things that you're dealing with in your workplace. It hopefully gives you some understanding of our model and how it may work. And as Anna's just said, happy to continue the conversation.
Yep.
If you're up for it. So again, thanks for giving up your time. Happy to receive any feedback. So if you want to send feedback through, please do that as well.
Yeah, we'll be sending out a survey and the recording afterwards to everyone, so you can rewatch and provide us with feedback, which would be good. There was one question about, I guess, the role of a facilitator in kind of facilitating genuine conversations. You know, what's the point of having a third party?
Look, in some of my experiences, I had to sit with or be a third party, because if I didn't, they probably would have punched on. But that's an extreme example. I guess a facilitator like me, or people at leading teams, we're able to just play the role to be able to help people articulate, clarify, perhaps ask some questions that perhaps they've missed, help set the scene, help with follow-up. There's certainly lots of examples where we don't get involved as a third party with some of those conversations because the people are willing and able themselves, but certainly having someone who's perhaps done some work with the team, has done some work with the individuals, I often get asked if I can sit in and at least just listen and make some observations. So there is some use. Again, it's up to you as to whether or not you think a third person would be useful. And clearly there's some examples where you might need HR or something like that in there, because the relationship is so fractured that just from a process point of view, and perhaps even from a HR and ER perspective, a third person is required. But what we are trying to do is create environments where, as a team, we can have these conversations and commit to resolution and work together to move forward as a group. So third parties can help. That's up to you as to work out whether or not you think it might.
Okay, great. That's all.
So again, thank you everyone. Really appreciated seeing most of you on the screen, and wish you all the best as you navigate your way personally and professionally through what is a challenging time for some. So thank you very much. Cheers.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Bye.
No worries.
Thank you.